If you're standing there looking at your hydrangea right now and thinking the main show is winding down, this is the moment you need to pay attention. Because late July is when a lot of gardeners mentally check out, and the plant does the exact opposite. It starts making decisions, quiet ones, expensive ones, the kind that decide whether the flowers you get next year are bigger, stronger, and more reliable, or whether you spend another season staring at healthy leaves and wondering where all the blooms went. And the dangerous part is this. Most of the damage people do to hydrangeas happens when they think they're helping. They tidy, they trim, they feed, they water every time the leaves droop, they neaten the shape, they cut off what looks tired, and without realizing it, they remove flower buds, soften new growth at the wrong time, waterlog the roots, and tell the plant to spend August recovering instead of performing. So today, I'm giving you 7 hydrangea jobs to finish before July ends if you want bigger blooms, longer-lasting blooms, and a plant that goes into August with momentum instead of stress. These are not vague gardening tips. These are the late July decisions that change what happens next. Some help extend this season, some protect next season. And a couple of them are where people lose an entire year of flowers without even noticing. So take a proper look at your plant before you touch anything, because Task 1 decides how safely you can do everything else. Task 1. Figure out which hydrangea, actually growing this, is the task that saves you from half the mistakes on the internet. Because prune your hydrangea is useless advice unless you know what kind you have. Hydrangeas do not all behave the same way, and if you treat them like they do, you're gambling with the buds. There are 2 main categories you need to care about here. The first group makes flowers on old wood. That means next year's blooms form on stems the plant already has. The second group flowers on new wood. That means it can grow fresh stems next season and still bloom on them. That one difference decides whether a late cut is harmless or a disaster. If yours has big round mophead blooms or flatter lacecap flowers, there's a good chance you're dealing with a big leaf hydrangea. If it has that classic blue, pink, or purple hydrangea look that people picture first, slow down. Those are often the ones people accidentally ruin by cutting too much. Mountain hydrangeas behave similarly. Oakleaf hydrangeas also bloom on old wood. Those are the types where timing matters most. If your flowers are cone-shaped, upright, and often age from white into pink or green, that's usually a panicle hydrangea. If it throws rounded white blooms on softer stems and grows more like a loose shrub, that's often a smooth hydrangea. Those types are much more forgiving because they bloom on new growth. Why does this matter so much before July ends? Because on old wood hydrangeas, flower planning for next year begins earlier than most people realize. Once you understand that, you stop looking at late July like cleanup season and start seeing it as bud protection season. So before you deadhead, before you shorten anything, before you improve the shape, say it out loud, old wood or new wood. If you get that one answer right, the rest of this gets a whole lot safer, and if you're not completely sure, use this rule. When in doubt, prune less. A hydrangea can forgive hesitation far more easily than it forgives an overconfident cut. Task 2. Deadhead the right way, or don't deadhead. At all, this is where a lot of people think they're being careful when they're actually removing more than they should. A faded hydrangea flower bothers people. It looks dry, it looks finished, it starts losing color, and the instinct is to take the stem down to where the plant looks neat again. That is exactly where the problem starts, especially on old wood types. Deadheading is not the same thing as pruning. Deadheading means removing the spent bloom at the tip. That's it. Not reshaping the plant, not shortening all the stems to make them even. Not taking every flower-bearing stem down by several inches because it looks cleaner from across the yard. Walk up to one spent bloom and follow its stem down slowly. You'll see leaf pairs or nodes stepping down the stem. If you're working on an old wood hydrangea, your job is to remove only what is finished at the end, while preserving as much of that stem as possible. The lower you cut, the greater the chance you're removing the very wood the plant needs for future flowers. This is why people say, "My hydrangea grows beautifully, but it hardly blooms. The leaves are fine, the roots are fine, the plant is alive and vigorous." But every year, the flower-bearing wood gets taken off in the name of tidying. Now, on repeat blooming types, deadheading can help keep the plant moving instead of shifting all its energy into finishing seed heads. On newer reblooming varieties, removing spent blooms may encourage faster repeat flowering. But even there, the cut should be disciplined. You are taking away the old flower, not performing a summer haircut. If you have panicle or smooth hydrangeas, you've got more flexibility. They are not as touchy about summer shaping because their flowering system is different. But even then, don't infuse can tolerate more cutting, with benefits from random cutting. Clean, purposeful cuts are always better than emotional ones. So here's the late July rule. If all you need to do is remove tired flower heads, do only that. Don't turn deadheading into pruning by accident. The difference between those two actions is small in your hand and massive in next year's bloom count. And if you're ever unsure, leave more stem than feels necessary. A hydrangea with a few fading flower heads is still beautiful. A hydrangea with no flowers next year because you got aggressive for the sake of neatness is frustrating all season long. Task 3. Stop doing the one quick trim that costs you next year flowers. This is the part gardeners justify to themselves. They say, I'm not heavily pruning it. I'm just taking a little off the top. I'm only shaping it. It was flopping, so I cleaned it up. That small tidy up in late July is one of the most expensive little cuts you can make on an old wood hydrangea, because hydrangeas don't care what your intention was. The plant only responds to what got removed, and once flower-producing wood is gone, the plant does not reward good intentions. It just grows back green. The reason this mistake is so common is that hydrangeas often look messy by midsummer. Some blooms are fading, some stems lean, some flowers are heavier than others. A few branches look longer and less symmetrical, so the whole shrub starts tempting you into treating it like a hedge. But it is not a hedge. Hydrangeas are one of those plants where natural structure matters more than tidy geometry. On old wood types, late-season pruning reduces flowers because you are removing stems that carry or support future bloom potential. On some hydrangeas, those flower buds develop later in the season, and cutting back at the wrong time reduces what the plant can show you next year. That means your late July mindset has to change from how do I make this look tighter to how do I protect what this plant is building. If a stem is truly dead, that's different. Dead wood can come out. If you have obvious damage, broken sections, or something diseased, handle it. But the average healthy green stem that simply looks too long or a little awkward, leave it alone unless you know you're dealing with a type that blooms on new wood and you understand the trade-off. And there's another reason this matters right now. Every unnecessary cut in summer asks the plant to respond. It has to redirect energy. It has to seal wounds. It often pushes replacement growth. That means resources that could have gone toward flower support, bud formation, and stable late-season performance are now being spent on recovery. So if you've got secateurs in your hand and you catch yourself trying to improve the silhouette, stop. Put them down. Ask whether you are solving a real problem or satisfying your eye for 10 seconds. Hydrangeas reward restraint far more often than they reward fussing. One of the most useful things you can do before July ends is not an extra task. It's refusing the wrong one. Task 4. Fix your watering. Routine before August heat curm stress in Tutulan hydrangeas are dramatic. That's part of why people love them, and it's also why people drown them. A hot afternoon comes along, the leaves droop, the whole plant looks offended by life, and the first reaction is panic watering. Then it happens again the next day, so the hose comes back out, then again, and very quickly you've trained yourself into thinking wilt always means thirst. It doesn't. Hydrangeas do need reliable moisture, especially when they're blooming hard, but they also hate sitting in water. Roots that stay too wet struggle, and a stressed root system can make the entire plant look thirsty even when the soil is already overloaded. So now you've got the worst combination possible. A plant that looks dry because its roots are unhappy, and a gardener responding by making the roots even unhappier. This is why timing matters when you check the plant. Don't judge a hydrangea at the hottest point of the day and assume you're getting honest information. Check it in the morning. Look at it before the heat starts pushing it around. If it looks firm, lifted, and reasonably turgid in the morning, then yesterday's dramatic afternoon slump was not necessarily a crisis. It may have been heat stress, temporary moisture loss, or simple midday response. When you water, water the base, not the leaves. Not a quick splash over the whole shrub, the base. Hydrangeas respond better to a real soak than to constant surface teasing. Early morning watering is especially useful because it gives the plant access to moisture before the day heats up, and it reduces the problems that come with keeping foliage wet for long periods. And while you're down there, pay attention to the soil. If it stays soggy, you don't have a watering problem. You have a drainage problem. If water sits around the roots, no amount of good intention fixes that. Hydrangeas want moisture, not a swamp. If your plant is in a container, this becomes even more important. Pots heat faster, dry faster, and swing between extremes much faster than soil in the ground. A container hydrangea can go from comfortable to stressed very quickly in late July. But even there, the answer is not frantic little drinks all day. It's consistent, thorough watering paired with a potting setup that actually drains. The goal here is simple. Stop making the plant alternate between stress and suffocation. Stable moisture is what supports bloom size and bloom longevity. Big flowers are expensive for a plant to hold. Long-lasting flowers are expensive too. If the moisture supply keeps swinging wildly, performance drops first where you notice it most. The blooms, task 5. Rebuild the root zone so the plant stops fighting the soil by late July. A lot of hydrangea problems are not above ground at all. They're happening where nobody is looking. The soil that was fine in spring may now be drying too fast. The mulch that looked generous a few months ago may be thin, crusted, or broken down. Bare patches may have opened around the base, and once the root zone starts overheating and drying in cycles, the flowers are the first thing that show you the cost. Hydrangeas are far more forgiving when their root zone stays cool and even, not cold, not soaked, just protected from the kind of repeated bake-and-dry stress that late summer brings. So before July ends, check what's happening under the canopy. If the soil is exposed, hard, or drying too quickly, refresh the mulch layer around the plant. You are trying to moderate temperature swings and slow moisture loss, not bury the crown under a pile of material. Keep mulch around the root zone, but don't pack it directly against the stems. That traps moisture where you don't want it and can create rot problems where the plant should stay dry and stable. And don't ignore drainage while you're thinking about mulch. People often hear hydrangeas love water and then plant them where water collects. That is not the same thing as giving them consistent moisture. Good drainage and steady moisture can live together. Constantly wet roots and good flowering usually do not. If your soil drains too quickly, organic matter and mulch help. If it holds too much water, you need to be honest about that too. Some hydrangeas are underperforming not because they need more fertilizer or more pruning, but because every root is living in an inconsistent environment. This task doesn't feel glamorous, which is exactly why people skip it. There's no dramatic before and after the same afternoon. But this is the kind of work that changes bloom endurance. A plant that isn't repeatedly stressed at the roots can keep flowers looking better for longer and can support stronger growth without collapsing every time the weather turns hot. Think of it this way. The flowers are the visible performance, but the soil is the operating system. If the system keeps overheating, nothing on top works as well as it should. Task 6. Open up airflow and remove the quiet competition. Around the plant sometimes the problem is not the hydrangea itself. It's what you've allowed to crowd it. A hydrangea packed tightly against a wall, squeezed by neighboring shrubs, or surrounded by dense growth has to work harder than it should. Leaves stay damp longer. Air doesn't move properly through the canopy. Disease pressure rises. And even if the plant survives all that, bloom quality suffers because the plant is operating under low-level stress all the time. Poor air circulation is one of those problems that doesn't always announce itself in a dramatic way. Sometimes it looks like leaf spotting. Sometimes it looks like tired foliage. Sometimes blooms age faster or stems stay weaker. Sometimes the plant just never seems to look as clean and strong as you think it should. So take a proper look around your hydrangea, not just at it. Is grass growing right up to the base? Are weeds using the same space? Is another shrub pressing into the sides? Is it jammed against a fence with no room for leaves to dry after watering or rain? This matters more than people think because hydrangeas are not isolated sculptures. They're sharing air, water, light, and root space with everything nearby. Even a healthy plant can struggle to hold big, long-lasting flowers if it's losing the underground competition or living in stagnant air. Now, this is not permission to aggressively butcher the hydrangea from the inside. Remember what we just covered about unnecessary cutting. What you want is intelligent relief. Clear the base, remove weeds, pull competing growth away where possible. If there are obviously congested, non-essential, crossing, or damaged stems and you know your plant type can handle it appropriately, make careful decisions. The goal is improved airflow, not a summer shock haircut, and pay special attention if you water overhead. Wet foliage in a crowded plant stays wet longer, and that's when trouble builds quietly. Watering at the base and opening up the area around the plant solve more than people realize. This task is especially powerful for bloom longevity because tired, crowded plants don't hold the same finish. Flowers age faster on stressed plants. Foliage looks rougher. The whole shrub loses that clean, luxurious look earlier than it should. Give the plant room to breathe, and the difference often shows up not just in health, but in how polished the bloom display stays through the rest of the season. Task 7. Stop panic feeding and start thinking like someone who wants flowers. Not just leaves late July does something to gardeners, it makes them nervous. If the plant isn't performing exactly the way they hoped, they start reaching for fertilizer as if food can solve timing, pruning, drainage, and root stress all at once. Usually, it can't. Hydrangeas do not always bloom better when they are fed more. In fact, they often bloom better when they are not overfed. And one of the easiest ways to create a big, lush, leafy hydrangea with disappointing flowers is to push too much nitrogen into it. Nitrogen is excellent at making plants look busy. Lots of leaf growth, lots of softness, lots of green. That can feel satisfying in the short term because the plant responds visibly. But if what you want is better flowering, more is not automatically better. A plant that is repeatedly pushed into extra vegetative growth is not necessarily being helped toward bigger, longer-lasting blooms. That's why late July is the wrong moment for emotional feeding. Before you pour anything on, ask what problem you think you are solving. Pale leaves, general stress, weak blooming? If the issue is actually bad pruning, soggy soil, root stress, or lack of moisture consistency, fertilizer is not the hero of this story. For plants in the ground, balanced feeding is typically something to think about earlier in the season rather than as a midsummer rescue move. If the plant is already flowering or has formed buds and it looks generally healthy, do not assume more food is the answer. Sometimes the smartest late July decision is restraint. Conscour's plants are a little different because nutrients leach out faster when you water repeatedly. But even then, the answer is measured support, not overcorrection. The goal is to maintain performance, not stimulate a wild flush that the plant then has to support in heat. And if you are trying to influence bloom color on the pH-sensitive hydrangeas, remember that color changes are not a last-minute trick right at flowering time. Soil chemistry and aluminum availability matter long before the bloom is fully open. So again, the point is not random product use. It's deliberate timing and understanding what your plant actually responds to. This is one of the most important mindset shifts in hydrangea care. Stop treating every summer slowdown like a hunger problem. Sometimes the plant needs protection, not stimulation. Sometimes it needs cooler roots, not more feed. Sometimes it needs fewer cuts, not more products. And sometimes the best way to get bigger blooms is to stop forcing growth that looks impressive now but costs you later. So there they are. The 7 hydrangea tasks to finish before July ends if you want bigger blooms, longer-lasting blooms, and a plant that goes into the rest of summer with strength instead of stress. Know what type you're growing before you touch it. Deadhead properly instead of cutting for neatness. Stop the casual shaping that steals future flowers. Fix your watering routine before heat turns stress into decline. Rebuild the root zone so moisture stays stable. Open up airflow and remove competition around the plant. And stop panic feeding like leaves are the goal when flowers are what you actually want. And if you only do one thing today, make it this. Identify whether your hydrangea blooms on old wood or new wood, because that single answer protects you from the mistake that costs people the most flowers with the least warning. Now I want to know which one of these 7 you were closest to getting wrong. Was it the watering, the deadheading, the late tidy-up cut? Put it in the comments, because that tells me exactly what gardeners are struggling with most right now. And if this helped you catch the problem before August does, subscribe, because the next one is going into the hydrangea pruning myth that keeps healthy shrubs from blooming the way they should. Fix it now, protect next season, and I'll see you in the next one.